I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Friday, the last day of January, and Dennis, I don't know about you, but here in Colorado, they wrapped up and they gave us our January statistics. It's been an average of 24.8 degrees per day in January, and we've had 2.5 to 3 times our average snowfall in January. I am delighted to see the month get on out of here.
Well, I have not looked at what our actual stats are because I'm not a dork like that. But I can say
the local news 2-3 times
anecdotally, we had. So I base it on. So I work for a transportation company, and in January, one of our biggest clients, or many of our biggest clients, are high school and middle school ski clubs. And the last several years has been rife with cancellations and low snow. They had lots of snow this year. I think this week or maybe next week is the end of it. And I think they've got enough snow to be able to keep up the snowmaking if it goes into next week. But they usually do about 5 weeks worth of ski trips. I mean, and it's not uncommon for us to do 40 or 50 of these school ski clubs in a week. So they've been skiing their asses off this year. So anecdotally, I'm in the same boat, but it's nice as hell. It's like 45 degrees here today.
Yeah, it's we just crested over into 50. I mean, yesterday was fascinating. This week's not been too bad, but yesterday I woke up, they called a snow day, and I was looking outside and I'm like, well, this seems premature. And then right about 7 o'clock, it looked like the Hoth system. And I had like 1.5 foot drifts of snow in my driveway when I went to shovel at 1. So, but today it was 52. It's supposed to be a stretch of 60s. It's good that we have some nice weather to enjoy, because we certainly don't have football to enjoy this weekend unless you like a little flag football, and then the Pro Bowl games are there. I did not watch any of the skills challenge. I don't plan on watching any of the game. Are you going to catch any of the Pro Bowl?
I am not. Actually, I'm more interested in the Senior Bowl, and I watched the first half of the Shrine game last night. So I'll be doing, it's rookie season, so I'm going to start to recap that. You've got about 75% of analysts that are all up in arms about Jalen Milroe's 8.5-inch hands, and another 25 that are like not at all plussed about it. I guess nonplussed was the word I was looking for. I just think that right now it's getting into draft season. I'm looking at mock drafts, trying to get ready for free agency and see what's going to happen to some of my players that have contracts expiring. How are my teams looking? Get ready. I love startup season, even though at this point in my fantasy football life, I don't do a lot of startups just because of the number of dynasty leagues I'm already in. So I do have one Empire League that resets, so we're doing a startup there. Shout out Swagzilla OG. He's chasing me, trying to get me to do another startup. I love Shane, and so he might be able to convince me into it. but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it is getting to be that season. Speaking of which, Tuesday we're planning to look at our first rookie mock draft of the season. Seems early, but this is a good time to start diving into it, start feeling things out. Today we are actually going to be looking at a full dynasty startup. We did a 16 round in the books, thanks to all the people.
And we made it all the way through.
Yeah,
only had one person flake on us. Auto pick here and there, but I was very impressed. The people who joined it were all very committed. I was very pleased.
Before we do that, the only real piece of news, not a lot of the coaching news. It does seem like Kellen Moore is still the favorite for the Saints. They're hoping to do an in-person interview after the Super Bowl, so it'll probably be a little bit of time before we hear about that. But news did break this week about Baltimore Ravens kicker Justin Tucker. Seems that much like Deshaun Watson, he may have had some inappropriate times at local massage parlors. Seems like this may have gone back a few years, but is now bubbling up to the surface. He's coming off a season where, the previously unmissable kicker seemed a lot more human this year. Do you wonder, Dennis, if this kind of thing was bubbling up and starting to take effect and maybe threw him off his game a little?
All right, so get a little bit here, but we've seen it in the past when superstar degenerates get caught being degenerate. They stop being degenerates. Their game goes to hell. Tiger Woods, his game went to hell when he got busted. Deshaun Watson, his game went to hell. Justin Tucker, there were some tweets out I that were reported out as early as 2021. Word of this was coming out, and now we've got the full story. Obviously he's denying it and gonna go on and try to get out of it, but I mean, he's a kicker, he's not a quarterback, and the chances of him not playing another down, I mean, unless the Browns decide they need to sign a new kicker, it looks pretty grim on him playing any more football, especially at 36 years old, coming off arguably his worst season as a kicker.
Yeah, a lot of people were kind of surprised and voiced were vocal in their surprise that Baltimore stuck with him during the season, because he missed some big kicks. Might have been some of the reason that they ended up on the road in Buffalo as opposed to being maybe a home team. They lost a couple of games where they missed some real crucial kicks and lost by just a few points, including that first Steelers game. So it will be interesting to see what happens. He's been a very popular player there, but we have seen how these kind of scandals can really crumble that shield of popularity in a fat hurry.
Man, my beard looks fantastic. I mean, it's white as hell, but makes me look old.
I'm sorry to bump it off, but we are going to dive into. We did our first mock draft. This is a full Dynasty mock draft. So for a little bit here, I'm going to bump us off so that you can see, if you're watching on video, the biggest screen possible. We did a 12 team. I did not have any rookies available in here. As I said, we're going to do a rookie mock for Tuesday. And I know Dennis and I are both dropping ourselves into the inverse mirror positions of where we were here to kind of give a feel for how that whole startup process might go. Because a lot of times when you're doing these startups here in January, February, you will often not have the rookies included, so you can do a rookie draft later, and sometimes so you can even trade those picks. So we did a full startup Dynasty Mock Superflex. The starting lineup that I have set in here right now is quarterback, Superflex, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a flex position, tight end, and we had 8 bench positions, so 16 rounds total. So, Dennis, let's talk about the first round. As you might expect, a little bit QB heavy. You were at pick number 3. I set myself at pick number 7, wanted to be kind of an awkward middle pick because sometimes those, you have a lot of time to think about it in between picks. And if you're like me, you second guess yourself. But we started off, Josh Allen goes at 101, and then Hayden Daniels went at 102 right in front of you. And I know that you were a little bummed about that.
I was chapped. Yeah. I took 103 because I thought, that's probably a safe spot to get Jaden Daniels. And it wasn't. I got sniped. Now, I did take Lamar. That was a good consolation. I love what Jackson does from a fantasy perspective. But I really thought I'd get Jaden Daniels. And as somebody who was high on CJ Stroud, even, he came into his second year and he wasn't as good. It's easy to buy into the narrative that, Stroud, we saw Stroud struggle. He got figured out. They'll figure out Daniels. I just think that with Stroud's Daniels' rushing ability, I think that his floor is going to be a little bit higher than CJ Stroud's while the defenses figure him out. And honestly, they've got 15, 16, 17 games of these guys going into the year too. And so these good defensive coordinators are able to develop plans to neutralize some of that ability. That being said, I was like, man, I'm going to go get Jaden Daniels. And Thuggy C was like, no, you're not.
Yep. And then, so you mentioned Stroud goes right after you at 4. Some people have felt that was high. Our friend John took him. Was very bullish on him. Thinks
much like myself, John is a noted Buckeye. So
yeah. So then we had Hurts at 5. Brooksy, who was drafting at 6, has an upcoming startup of his own that he wanted to prep for, where he's actually picked 6, and it's a tight end premium league. I didn't set tight end premium here, but he wanted to get a feel for if you went for Bowers at 1, how the rest of the team would shape up. So he went there. For me at 7, I went with Joe Burrow. I have him right now as my Dynasty QB3, so I felt like that was pretty good value looking around. I don't think Cincinnati is going to substantially improve the personnel that they have on defense. I think for the rest of Joe Burrow's career, he's probably going to have to outscore people, and that's a great thing. If you're in fantasy, he's been, I almost think he's a little under the radar for all the massive numbers he puts up. I had him actually in our league dynasty team, and that was one of the reasons that helped propel me into the championship game, because he was consistently just putting up banger numbers, especially down the stretch, because they couldn't stop a fart in the wind. So I didn't think that was too bad. Right behind me, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson go. People start going away from quarterback. We had Bijan Robinson, the first running back, off the board. I don't think that's too big of a shock. Then Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then our friend Jacob closing the round with Patrick Mahomes. Felt like pretty good value there for him, dropping to QB7. But how did you think the rest of the first round played out?
Well, 7 quarterbacks, 3 wide receivers, 1 running back, 1 tight end. So it was very standard dynasty super flex philosophy oriented. Heavy on quarterbacks, then wide receivers, because you're trying to build a young team. Chase and Jefferson, I think they're consistently top 2, top 3 in startup drafts. I will be honest, I was a little bit surprised that A.J. Brown went before C.D. Lamb. I don't think I would have.
Amon-Ra St. Brown, not A.J.
Oh,
Brown.
Amon-Ra St. Brown. Still, I think Amon-Ra going before C.D. Lamb, I think, was still a little bit of a surprise. I think that for me, if I'd have been picking there, I'd have had Lamb and maybe even Malik Neighbors over St. Brown. Mahomes coming off the board at QB7, I feel like that's right about where his value is, which is crazy to say because he probably is the best quarterback in the NFL. But over the last couple years, that team has transitioned and been more defense oriented, and their defense is a lot better. And so Mahomes isn't throwing like mad like he used to. Still puts up good numbers. And as we've gotten into the playoffs, he's more prone to take over the game and throw it a lot more. But in the regular season, I don't think he felt the need to throw the ball 50 times, and they didn't have to have him put up 500 yards passing for them to win because their defense has gotten so much better. So QB7, I think if I'm sitting at the 112 like Jacob was and Mahomes falls to me, I like that. I think that's nice. You know, he doesn't run much in the regular season. In the postseason, he tends to run a little bit more. But I thought it was other than probably St. Brown being, one or two wide receivers too high, I think it was a pretty good first round.
Yeah, and Jacob, as you mentioned, able to back that up on the turn and grab CeeDee Lamb, so a real nice start there. I think the most curious pick for me early is at 202 going Anthony Richardson. Now, if this was this time last offseason, I think you were seeing him go in this range, but after the dumpster fire of 2024, we saw there, to my mind, there are a whole lot more questions about Anthony Richardson, and I am no longer on the A-Rich as a QB1 lock train, which I think is where you have to feel like you're going to be if you're going to take him here with the 14th overall pick. But how did you feel when he came off the board there?
I agree with you. I think it was a reach. I think there's probably 6 to 10 more quarterbacks I'd have taken before him. Now, I will say that if I was going to start my draft quarterback, I think you may be able to make the case, well, I'm going for the upside because I still believe taking him as my QB2. But they didn't. They went Amon-Ra and then Anthony Richardson and then waited several rounds before taking another quarterback. So I feel like Team 11 is in a deep hole at the quarterback position unless Anthony Richardson just blows up in his, third year now. And don't get me wrong, it could happen, but I'm a little bit of a skeptic there.
I would say if this was our scenario that we're doing for a startup, so he takes a flyer on Richardson, and then you're right, not till round 11 grabs Geno Smith, only ends the draft with 2 quarterbacks, and I don't think necessarily a lock in either of your selections. But if this was kind of the kind of startup scenario that we have going where you're following the rookie draft, that would drop him to pick number 2, which puts him in good position to get either a Cam Ward or a Shedeur Sanders right there to add to the mix. And maybe you then feel a little bit better about it. But coming out of the startup draft, I think that's a tough position. The rest of round 2, we saw Justin Herbert go. I think probably a great spot for him. Jahmyr Gibbs comes off as the second running back off the board. Then Kyler Murray went. For my second pick, I went and grabbed Saquon Barkley. I actually have him currently sitting as my number 1 in Dynasty. I love where he is in Philly. I love what we've seen, how he's been unleashed. So I felt like that was some good value. Then I know Malik Neighbors went. I believe you had hoped he was going to slide to Hugh, and we're a little bit bummed. Then we saw Caleb Williams. This is another one I thought was maybe a little early for Williams based on the situation and what we saw, but maybe if you're a real true Ben Johnson optimist believer, you're excited there. Then Purdy, and then we close with wide receivers. You getting Garrett Wilson, then Puka Nacua goes, and then Marvin Harrison Jr. So what did you think of the rest of round 2?
I think round 2 was a little bit reachy in a lot of spots, starting with Richardson. I like Herbert. I think QB9 was at 9.
Yeah,
for him.
QB9.
That's pretty good value. Jahmyr Gibbs, I like that. Kyler Murray, QB10. My head says that's crazy, or my heart says that's crazy. It's too high. My head says when I look at the numbers is like, well, but again, he's still never had a 1,000-yard season. If he gets dinged up because he runs the ball, it really hampers his passing. I don't know. I'm just not a Kyler Murray guy. I was hoping Neighbors would fall. I don't think I really believed he would. I think Neighbors is probably going to go somewhere around 110 to 202 in most startup drafts. I think people saw what he did with that clown show of quarterbacks in New York this year, and I think they're going to disregard it. Brian Daboll and whoever succeeds him, if he doesn't turn it around, knows that the mission in New York is get the ball to Malik Neighbors because he gets open. Caleb Williams, I probably would have had him a little bit lower. What's that, QB 12, 11?
11, QB 11.
And Brock Purdy even. I think I would have taken Jordan Love or maybe even Drake May. I don't know. I'm souring on Purdy. He's had his second elbow injury. If McCaffrey comes back, they're going to be heavier on the run game. To me, it's just it's a little bit worrisome. I like Garrett Wilson. I believe in the talent. I think. I think that Rodgers and Adams are probably going to go away, and Wilson's going to be back up at the number one. But I also saw something today, a note that said he was likely going to ask for a trade because of the dysfunctional organization. But that doesn't mean he's going to get traded. Not at what is he? His third year, 25 years old. I could see it when you have a 29 or 30, 31-year-old Devontae Adams saying, "Yeah, we'll let you walk," but probably not with a young Wilson. Nakua, if he can stay healthy, I think he's going to push for top 5. And then Marvin Harrison, it's money takers, I think, took a leap of faith. I'm a believer in Marvin Harrison. I think he's going to be a lot better next season, but he was wide receiver 35 this year. Trey McBride is a target hog in Arizona. And so with Murray not throwing for over 4,000 yards, Trey McBride, catching a ton of passes, James Conner being solid in the running game, if they can't stop using Marvin Harrison to run 9 routes, I don't know what's going to happen to him, because I think it frustrates him every bit as much as it does fantasy managers. It's okay to do that once in a while, but that's not his strength. Get him on those crossers. So overall, I felt like there were a few reaches in this round.
Yeah, then we come into the third round, kicks off with Drake London and Brian Thomas Jr., a couple of good young receivers who are in offenses, seemingly in good offensive position. And then you went with Trey McBride at the third pick. And I'll be honest, I had actually thought about McBride as a positional advantage. And if he would have been there, I would have gone that way. So I thought that was a great pick. Then Christian McCaffrey goes at 304 to our friend John, who's a big 49er fan, probably why he double stacked Purdy and McCaffrey. Then Sam Laporta at the 5th pick. I thought that was maybe a little early based on what we saw from year 2 and coming back to earth a little bit. Then Jordan Love, QB 13 off the board, ends up being Brooksy's first QB. So I think he does pretty well there. I went and grabbed Jonathan Taylor to give myself a couple of good running backs, 2 guys I have up in the top 5. I felt pretty good about that start. Then Kyron Williams goes, Breece Hall. Then we get Drake May, QB 14 off the board. Felt like pretty good value. Gets paired with Justin Herbert and Bijan Robinson. Not a bad start. Then A.J. Brown. So we have Amon-Ra and A.J. Brown along with Anthony Richardson. An interesting strategy there. And then our friend Jacob closes with Devon Achane. So what did you think of round 3? And were you pretty pleased to land McBride there?
I was. I agree with excuse me. I agree with you. I do think that McBride is a positional advantage, even in non-tight end premium leagues. He just gets so much passing volume, and he's so effective. I think it was fluky that he didn't get a touchdown till the second to last game or last game of the year.
Yeah,
Thanks, Kyler Murray.
It's probably just Arizona's defunct passing game there.
But McBride is a bona fide stud, and until they figure out how to consistently use Marvin Harrison and Michael Wilson, I think McBride continues to get his volume. I do like the Brian Thomas pick. It'd be interesting to see, can Liam Cohen unleash him? Thomas had a really, really good year, and he's another in that line of LSU wide receivers that is vying for the wide receiver 1 spot. I will note in the first 2 rounds, we did only have 2 teams start quarterback, and that was John and Jay Everett at the 104 and 105. So even though it's a super flex league, after the first round, the quarterbacks, going off consistently, it wasn't, everybody wasn't racing to get their second quarterback. McCaffrey is such a gamble. Hamler's went McCaffrey. He went 2 Buckeyes and 2 49ers in his first 4 picks. Those are his favorite teams. I get it. Might be a little bit risky. Laporta, he was disappointing this year. No doubt about it. I like the Barkley Taylor stack. I'm a believer in Jonathan Taylor. I think he bounces back this year. I like Kyron Williams, but I'm afraid of his size. And I feel like, we saw his passing game diminish a lot this year. And I'm just a little bit concerned that we're headed for a breakdown. Drake May, I think he's ready to, take a step forward. I think they're going to give him some weapons. A.J. Brown is A.J. Brown. And Devon Achane, another little guy. They use him differently than the Rams use Kyron Williams. They use him a lot more in the passing game and a lot more in space. I am a little concerned. I mean, he's almost 15 pounds lighter than Kyron Williams, who's light. So, Achane is definitely going to be one to keep an eye on. But, man, he is so explosive. Mahomes, Lamb, and Achane is your first 3. That's a pretty good start.
Yeah, and then he followed that up with Nico Collins. I really like that to kickstart round 4. Then we get Tyreek Hill, going wide receiver heavy there, but some potentially high producers. Rome Odunze goes next. I thought that was interesting. He goes ahead of DJ Moore. A lot of faith that he's going to take a step up. Then we get Jared Goff, which is Rooster's first quarterback. He comes off the board as QB 15. Kyle Pitts goes at the 5th spot there. I know people are still high on Pitts, and I still see a lot of people stick him way up in dynasty rankings, but maybe he'll have that 4th or 5th year breakout, but it has not been great so far. I went with Bo Nix for my second quarterback. Ends up being quarterback 16 off the board. I thought that was pretty good value. He was QB 7 this year, and I think this might have been the worst supporting cast he's going to have. I think he fits there really well. Right after me, Brooksy gets Ladd McConkey, with Neighbors and McConkey, Jordan Love and Brock Bowers. Really like that start. Then Josh Jacobs, the first running back for Team 5. I thought that was a nice pick. Chris Olave, you mentioned the 2 49ers, 2 Buckeyes. Chris Olave, we've seen him go up there before. He puts up good numbers. For me, I'm a little weary after this last year because it feels like the Saints are a little bit of a dumpster fire right now. And I'm also having some long-term concerns. I feel a little bit about Olave like we have about Tua the last few years. Those head injuries are no joke. He missed a significant portion of the season after getting a couple of concussions. That makes me a little more nervous about him. I'll let you speak to that when you get up. Then you got Baker Mayfield as your QB2. We close with Trevor Lawrence and Ken Walker. So what kind of stands out to you from the 4th round?
Yeah, I agree with you on Pitts. Honestly, after McBride, I almost feel like Laporta probably should have been around later. And then probably Hawkinson ahead of Pitts. Kelsey, I don't know. Kittle is, he's older now. There's talk that if the Chiefs win, Kelsey's going to retire. So it feels like the tight end position, there should be a 2 or 3 round gap where tight ends aren't going off, because we're waiting to see who is going to step up and consistently be in that. Usually it's been like top 4 or 5 and then a huge tier of like 15 or 20 guys that could finish as a tight end 1. Well, we got Bowers, we got McBride. Laporta is still pretty young, so I think it makes sense to have him there. But then the other guys are starting to get a little bit older, and some of the young guys didn't step up like we expected. So I would have expected a little more space in the tight end draft. I love the Brian Thomas pick. I think he was great. Wrong round. I kind of was hoping Bo Nix would fall to me, because I would have taken him in the 4th. It makes perfect sense. You love the Broncos as much as Hamlers loves the 49ers. So I wasn't terribly surprised. But McConkey was the other guy that I was targeting. And, he went, 407.
Yep.
So at that point, I was like, well, am I going to pivot to running back? Am I going to go QB2? And I actually had queued up Kenneth Walker and James Cook, and thought, well, if I can pull those 2 in the 4th and 5th rounds, I'm going to feel real good about my running back. I know there's some talk about Walker, but a couple shows ago, we did our guys we thought were going to break out, and you picked Charbonnet and I picked Walker because I feel like Walker's a perfect fit for the Clint Kubiak offense. I know you like Charbonnet, but when I was there, I was like, you know what? I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. But then when I didn't get McConkey, and I realized, well, the quarterbacks, do I want to wait for a Bryce Young or JJ McCarthy or Michael Penix? It's Dynasty, so I don't know that I was going to go Dak or Tua. But I went ahead and I'm like, man, Baker's coming off a 41 touchdown season. Yes, he's losing Cohen, but we've also seen Baker's pretty good at learning a new offense. And now I think Tampa promoted their quarterbacks coach or their passing game coordinator to the OC. So there will be some continuity there. Jalen McMillan had a breakout. I think we both feel Chris Godwin's probably gone, but Mike Evans will be back for another year. Really solid running game. If they can continue to keep building that offensive line, I think Baker can continue to progress as a quarterback. So I was pretty happy to get Baker there, even though neither of my running backs made it back to me. Olave, it's going to be something to keep an eye on with the concussions. I don't know. There's a part of me that feels like they were like, they being the Saints, they were like, our season sucks. There's no reason to run him back out there with Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener. Let's keep him on the shelf. But when you have 2 concussions in that close a succession, you can have lingering effects and become more susceptible to concussions. So it's really going to be something to keep an eye on.
Well, we've gone through the top 4 rounds kind of player by player. I want to switch gears a little bit. Dennis, why don't you go through the rest of your team and what maybe some of your thought process was on the rest of your picks?
So in round 5, I went with Jackson Smith and Jigba. Round 6, Tyrone Tracy. Round 7, DeAndre Swift. Round 8, I went Jamison Williams. Then I actually got auto pick Cortland Sutton. Good thing I set me a queue. I don't mind that at all. Round 10, I went with Jalen McMillan. Round 11, Calvin Ridley. Kamani Vidal in the 12th, Romeo Dobbs in the 13th, Damian Pierce 14th, Roshan Johnson in the 15th, and Kayshon Boutte in the 16th. When it came back around to me after Walker and Cook basically got sniped from me, I felt like I was going to have some opportunity for, a couple backs to make it back around to me. And so I decided to go, dynasty mind, young wide receiver. Smith had a breakout season this year. So I went with Jackson Smith and Jigba there. In my head, I had queued up Chase Brown, Bucky Irving, Tyrone Tracy, and was hoping one of the three of them would make it back to me. Chase Brown went 2 picks later. Bucky Irving went to Jacob at the 12th pick of the round. But Tyrone Tracy did make it back to me. And so, it feels like he's the guy there in New York. He's going to end up being the lead back. I know they got Singletary under contract, but Tracy was just so much more explosive, competent as a pass blocker and good as a run receiving back. And he just put up numbers. So I feel like we're going to see a big share of Tyrone Tracy. But then when it came back around, I was really choosing between Chuba Hubbard and DeAndre Swift. And Hubbard went right before me. So that left me with DeAndre Swift. I feel like DeAndre Swift, the hard part is that Roshan Johnson's a good receiving back, but he's a big guy. And so it's trying to figure out, well, if Ben Johnson is going to run a similar offense in Chicago like he did in Detroit, is there going to be enough work for 2 backs? I think Swift is good enough as long as he stays healthy, and that hasn't always been easy for him. But I feel like he's the one. He's going to be the Jahmyr Gibbs guy. I don't know if Johnson will be super successful because even though he's big, he isn't necessarily as powerful like David Montgomery is. But if I had to pick a position that my team was weak at, I would say it's running back. Now, in the 15th round, I did go with Roshan just in case I'm wrong about who gets the volume there. So I did kind of hedge that a little bit. I hate the Kamani Vidal pick. I don't know why I picked Vidal. I was hoping Ray Davis or Kendre Miller would fall to me, or even Blake Corum, the 3 of them. Davis was probably the one I wanted the most. But they didn't fall, and I felt like, we're in round 12. I only have 2 running backs. I feel like I needed to get another running back. He did show some promise as a pass catcher in Los Angeles this year, and so I kind of rolled the dice there. But after Swift in round 7, I went with 4 straight wide receivers. I felt like when I looked at our lineup, I was surprised, honestly, that it was only 8 starters. And so with just 1 flex and only 2 wide receivers, I thought, well, I'm going to go with an upside pick at my flex position. And so I took Jamison Williams. Come back with Cortland Sutton, like he was in my queue, and I got auto pick because I got busy at work. But Sutton had a monster year this year, and I think that's going to continue. Jalen McMillan had a nice breakout, and I think is as long as Tampa doesn't bring back Chris Godwin, I think McMillan steps up and is the wide receiver 2 in Tampa. And, Baker threw 41 touchdowns. So he's going to – I think McMillan is in line to get some work. I don't know what the quarterback situation is going to be in Tennessee. It feels like at the 101, they have their choice of quarterbacks. It also feels like this is a lousy quarterback draft. And so they may not draft a quarterback in the first round. And if that's the case, they're going to give Levis 1 more year. Maybe they bring in a 2nd or 3rd round quarterback to see if Callahan can develop that player and he gets some starts later in the year. At the end of the draft, I really thought thought hard and long about taking Will Levis over Kayshon Boutte. But I like what Boutte did this year. And so I felt like building that depth and his potential to be the 1B in that offense if Drake May takes another step. I don't think Boutte will be the 1A. I think he could be the wide receiver 2 or at best the 1A or 1B in that offense. And what Romeo Doubs, at this point, Doubs, Pierce, they were depth picks. You never know who's going to be the wide receiver that gets the volume in Green Bay. We'll see if it shakes out and the funnel narrows and all there in 2025. But I like what Romeo Doubs does. He doesn't have the upside of a Christian Watson. He doesn't have the Deebo Samuel-ish stuff like Jaden Reed, but he does have the ability to be the consistent guy out there, getting a lot of snaps, getting a lot of targets, and making plays. And Dameon Pierce, he showed this season that he could run the zone blocking better than he did the year before. And at the beginning of the year. So he seems to be improving in the scheme. And so my thought there was, well, let me get a depth piece that has the potential to get some volume if Joe Mixon gets injured or Joe Mixon just gets old. So I went ahead and grabbed Dameon Pierce.
Yeah, so I'll go through mine. In round 5, I finally took my first wide receiver, T. Higgins, and I thought that was a pretty decent value. I don't actually expect him to be back with the Bengals. I think he's going to be a number 1 somewhere, and I'm hoping that he can put up some good production. I grabbed Devonta Smith when we came back around, wanting to build up some more wide receivers. And then, we did our players that we think might break out this last, and that does heavily influence some of my back half of my draft, starting with Zach Charbonnet, a guy who I'm high on as potentially taking a leap here this season. I grabbed him as my running back 3. I thought that was a pretty good position. I was seeing a lot of running backs kind of coming off the board, getting a little bit thinner. I thought that was a good spot, and then came back with Mike Evans, my wide receiver 3. I think he's still going to be the wide receiver 1 in Tampa Bay, still going to be a solid starter. When it was coming back around, I was targeting Jaden Reed and Khalil Shakir. And if you're looking on video, you can see that those were the 2 picks immediately in front of me. So that was a little bit of a bummer. So I pivoted and went with Chris Godwin. I liked the value for where he is. I don't expect him to be back with Tampa Bay, but I think he is a good enough wide receiver that he's going to go to one of these wide receiver needy teams and be peppered with targets. So I felt like that was a decent grab. I grabbed a quarterback 3 in Sam Darnold. This is another player. I'm not expecting him to be back with Minnesota, but I think what he put on tape and what he did this season is going to land him as a starter somewhere. There are a lot of QB needy teams, as we've talked about, not a QB rich draft. So I felt like he was the perfect kind of QB3, a guy that can come in for injuries, buys, or what have you. Then grab Marvin Mims. He's another of the guys I had on my breakout list. I loved the way he ended the season with Denver, and I thought as my wide receiver 5, that was pretty good. A couple positions that I really needed to pick up on at the end of the draft. I wanted to add some running back depth, and I waited on tight end. So I grabbed Corum, obviously somewhat of a snipe for Dennis right there. I think he has some good potential back there. Then I double dipped on tight ends. I got Cade Otton, who I think is a fairly serviceable starting tight end, and Ben Sinnott, a guy who I think could be in a good position to take a step forward depending on what happens with Zach Ertz. And then my last couple picks, I don't know what Denver's going to do in the backfield. I liked the Audric Estime pick. They've had some high talked about him. And then my last one, I considered going with Will Shipley because I kind of liked what I saw from him. And I don't know that the Eagles bring back Kenneth Gainwell, but I ended up just grabbing Jaleel McLaughlin because I figured it gave me 2 shots at getting somebody who's a contributor in that backfield in Denver. So that was kind of my round out there. Dennis, before we get out of here, I want us to each pick a squad we really like that's not ours and one that we have concerns about. So why don't you go first? What is one team other than yours or mine that you really like the draft they had?
So I like Jimmy Lee's team, JL Sparrow 24. Starting with Bijan, you've got a top 3 running back, and then Justin Herbert. We saw after the first few weeks of the season that Harbaugh loosened up on the passing game. I think they add help there. We know Quentin Johnston isn't the answer. Joshua Palmer's a free agent. Ladd McConkey was a breakout star. I think they add somebody there. I do think even if they bring Dobbins back, I think it'll be committee in the background. I like the Odunze pick. I think Johnson's gonna narrow the funnel some there. They're not gonna bring Allen back. Hawkinson and Andrews. He did message me and he had set a queue, and he said he probably wouldn't have went double tight end in rounds 6 and 8, 5 and 7. But he's drafting from Sydney, Australia, so sometimes the timing gets off for him. I do like his 3 quarterback options: Herbert, Drake May, and Bryce Young. Well, I think May and Young have the potential that at some point he'll be able to move one of those guys for either significant draft capital or a significant player. I love Tillman pick at 12-3. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 1 in Cleveland. Now, if they can just get a quarterback. So Jalen Wright, I think he steps in and takes over for Raheem Mostert in Miami this year. So he does have a lot of potential on his team.
The one I'm going to go with is our friend Jacob, who drafted in the 12th spot. We commented a couple times. I really like to start Mahomes, CeeDee Lamb, Devon Achane, Nico Collinson, grabbing Bucky Irving and Zay Flowers. I think gives him 3 really solid receivers. I like those 2 young running backs. Gets George Pickens. To me, Pickens a little volatile, but having him as your wide receiver 4 feels like a pretty good spot. He is a Vikings fan, grabs J.J. McCarthy as his QB2, but you know what? I think, McCarthy, it's seeming more and more like it's trending toward him getting that spot in Minnesota. They took him in the first round for a reason, so it makes sense to me. Tony Pollard, Tanks Bigsby, and Jordan Mason to round out that running back group. I like that a lot. Rashid Shaheed, we saw him do some great things last year before getting injured. I like that as an upside 5th wide receiver. He grabs Russell Wilson at the end of the draft as his QB3. Another guy may not be back in Pittsburgh, but I think he's going to be starting somewhere. He waited on tight end too, but I liked his tight end combo a little bit better than mine. Tucker Kraft had some great moments there and really seemed to emerge as the tight end you want in Green Bay. And then Theo Johnson, you had highlighted him. Both of us feel pretty strongly he might be in a great position to take a step forward in year 2. So I liked that grab. And also out of that position, if this is the typical startup combo, that's the team that's going to then turn around and have 101 in the rookie draft. So I think it puts him in a great position. Last up, why don't you give me one team you have some concerns about after seeing their draft?
Well, so team 8. Now the back half of that draft was auto picked, so I think that puts it at a distinct disadvantage. Started off great with Jamar Chase, but then took Kyler Murray as their QB1. Kyron Williams is their RB1, Travis Etienne, Rashad White, Jonathan Brooks, Zamir White, Zach Moss. I just don't think there's a ton of upside at the running back position for him. His quarterbacks are Murray and Dak Prescott. Kyler, I've never passed for 4,000 yards, and Dak coming off an injury. Now, on the plus side, I think Dak has the ability to bounce back if because he's got CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson and Jalen Tolbert. So if they can put an offensive line together for him, I think he can bounce back pretty good. But we've seen Rachaad White kind of get pushed out by Bucky Irving. Jonathan Brooks, is likely to be out all year. Zamir White had his shot and face planted. Zach Moss, he came over, looked like he was going to be something in Cincy, got injured, and Chase Brown blew up. So I don't know how much volume Moss is going to get. His wide receivers, Tank Dell, a free agent, Stephon Diggs, aging Cooper Kupp, Amari Cooper, A.D. Mitchell. Overall, I think that team leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that really stood out to me as well. As there's one lead pipe lock on that team, and that's Jamar Chase. And then beyond that backfield, we've mentioned our unease about Kyron Williams and his situation, Travis Etienne, Rachaad White, Jonathan Brooks, Samir White, and Zach Moss all have more dubious situations. Tank Dell, he basically gets back-to-back players there who probably aren't playing in 25 in Tank Dell and Jonathan Brooks. Diggs, we don't know where he's going to land. Kupp, it feels like that future is very much up in the air. Amari Cooper, an interesting one. He's a free agent. Where is he going to go? And A.D. Mitchell, we were kind of excited about him coming in because it seemed like we were all out on Alec Pierce. But now we're kind of out on that passing game in general. And Alec Pierce maybe looked like the best steal in the group in 2024. So I don't know what to make of that Indianapolis offense. So makes a little bit of sense. It's fun to dip our feet in, get a little bit of dynasty action going. How did you feel about the draft overall? Pretty fun?
I liked it. I was especially pleased, like I said, that, so often you'll do a mock draft and people are dipping out after the second or third round. Pretty much everybody stuck it out for at least half of this draft. And 11 of 12 were there for 14 or 15 rounds of the 16 rounds. So it was pretty sweet. And, there's sleepers. ADP is still a little off. So at this point of the year, you should be grabbing yourself some trusted rankings or doing your own rankings so you can kind of go about it that way. That's where you're going to find value doing startups this time of year. So, I know you do rankings. You post your rankings over at where?
Campus to Canton.
Campus to Canton. I don't have public rankings, but I know Dynasty Nerds has rankings. You can see them over at dynastynerds.com. I'm a big nerd guy. So, but nothing can prepare you more than practice. So get out there, see how do you react. Like I probably got sniped 6 times on this draft. And I'll be honest, the fact that I missed Juwan Jennings was available in the 14th round, I will forever be disappointed in myself.
Well, you mentioned dynasty rankings and stuff. We are going to start diving into that the rest of this month. We are going to do a dynasty rookie mock for Tuesday. Then next Friday will be the Super Bowl preview. We'll do a Super Bowl recap the Tuesday following and some bold predictions for 2025. And then we are going to start going into our dynasty rankings, starting quarterbacks, then going through running backs, receivers, and tight ends, kind of helping get you ready and talking about where we have these players prior to the NFL draft kicking off in April as you're going through some of these rookie drafts. So that'll be something to look forward to. But other than that, if you check out the Pro Bowl, tell us why. But if you're just pining away for football, Dennis, what can the people do?
Well, they should watch the Senior Bowl, not the Pro Bowl. Or they can go to their favorite podcast platform, hit that search bar, type in the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast, listen to our backlog of shows. You want to see where we were going into last year? We got a show for that. You want to see what we were doing 5 years ago? You can go listen to those shows, but we've gotten substantially better at broadcasting since then. leave us a ranking, leave us a rating and a review.
We will be back on Tuesday talking rookies as Super Bowl week begins. So until then, you guys have a wonderful weekend.